Welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we explore the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Dan Larrabee.
And I'm Luke DeWolf.
Well, Luke, today we have an incredible episode. We are going to be talking to Einar Selvik, the mastermind behind the incredible band Wardruna. And yeah, we're super excited to be talking to Einar. This is like one of the big ones for us.
Absolutely, and just a little bit of as far as the influence of Einar and Wardruna's music on us. It's kind of like it's very spiritual. If you're not familiar with Wardruna, absolutely go check them out and check out all of Einar's music as well. He's really tapping into something deep and something kind of spiritual, and it's hard to describe, and hopefully we'll get to ask him some questions about his music and the way he produces it and what exactly he's kind of going for here, because it's really some of the most impactful music I've ever listened to. And so we're extremely excited to have him on the show. Before we dive into it, I guess we'll just go through our usual social media everything.
Yeah, so if you'd like to get in touch with us, and we would definitely like you to get in touch with us, you can do that on Facebook at Northern Myths Podcast, Twitter at Northern Myths, and then we're both on Twitter at NorthMythDan, at NorthMythLuke, on Instagram at Northern Myths Podcast. I always think I'm forgetting one, but I think that's
the YouTube as well.
Oh yes, YouTube. Don't want to forget that one. Northern Myths Podcast there. Yeah, and like, share, subscribe. We love talking with people about different ideas. So absolutely, if you're listening and something pops in your head, like, share it with us. We'll definitely talk to you guys. It's awesome. It's one of our favorite parts because we always learn something. We're by no means experts, and we're happy to learn new things. So yeah, get in touch with us.
And speaking of experts, now I think without further ado, let's welcome Einar onto the show. Einar, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And I guess we'll just start off here. We've introduced you a little bit already here, but if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of your background, anything we might have missed.
Sure. My name is Einar Selvik, and composer and musician from the west coast of Norway. I've been involved in many different musical projects, but for the last 15-20 years I've sort of fully dedicated myself to working with older historical Nordic instrumentation and also thematics from the Norse and Nordic various traditions and culture. Most prominently through the musical project Wardruna, but I also do stuff where I'm involved both in music for composing for TV and film and other things like that in between. What I focus most on is Wardruna.
That's great. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to focus on those sorts of themes, the combination of what I see as Norse mythology and some of the runes, but I guess on the whole something more like the pre-Christian mythologies and worldview. How did you get onto that as your inspiration for your musical projects?
Well, it's a bit. There are many reasons for that, and not exactly one easy answer to it. I guess I've always been very interested in history, and I've been exposed to it since I was a small child. Had people in my close family who knew their saga literature and would sort of tell me a lot of stories and take me to places where, of historical significance and basically gave me made history a bit made it a living thing and made me part of it in a sense, and created, I guess that created some images that stuck, and didn't really reflect much on it back then. But of course, when I in my early teens found an interest of my own for these things, and yeah, I found that the connection was there already, and yeah, so in that sense, I when I sort of met these things in schools, I didn't really understand it. Yeah, it was so different to our modern way of viewing the world, with this whole circular thinking, and also the fact that you don't meet. There are no almighty gods. There are no only good or only evil personalities. Things interact, and yeah, it's more like human and more like nature. So I don't know. I really wanted to understand it better. So that sort of was the initial spark, I guess. And also I've had a very strong interest for the esoteric part of the tradition as well. And I don't know, I was quite lucky in the sense that when I was seeking out information about this, I had people pointing me in a direction where that basically made me study the sources rather than going to these modern New Age books on, for instance, the runes and stuff like that, which in many ways can be a good introduction, but ultimately modern rune lore in many cases vaguely resembles its origin. So I don't recommend it as the place to start, really. So I guess that's where it started, and of course a bit later on, working in different musical projects, especially within the metal scene, I've sort of carried this vision of doing something more in line with my own personal interest and my own personal beliefs and so on. And I at some point I just really felt the need to and also that I really wish that somebody would interpret some of these old thematics and traditions more on their own premises rather than just dabbling with it and just borrowing small elements from it here and there. That's something you see, for instance, in the metal scene. They use a lot of the imagery, the lyrical content, but and also you find that in traditional music over here and in world music, you see elements of it. But I really envisioned this project where I could where relevant instrumentations and sound and language and so on was used to give voice to some of these old thoughts and ideas. So that's basically how I got started.
So I understand that you were kind of involved in the metal scene at the time Wardruna started. Was that kind of how that all connected? If I'm right, you were still involved with Gorgoroth at the time, right?
Yeah. I basically started working with Wardruna maybe a year or two after I started in Gorgoroth. So I was working on that and even started recording quite a bit before I just felt very strongly that I needed to do something that actually meant something to me. And for me, Gorgoroth and that whole thing, that was art. That was nothing personal. It was more of a job, you know. So the need to do something that actually meant something to me sort of grew stronger and stronger. So I quit everything else that I was doing and just started over again and dedicated myself fully to that.
That's quite a leap of faith, usually, like that, to drop everything and really follow your heart. That's admirable.
Well, yeah, perhaps, but on the other hand, it was so strongly felt that I wouldn't actually call it a decision. It was just something that had to be done. It's almost more like a calling. And that's something I really feel. I still feel the same. It's Wardruna is the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing I think about when I sleep. There is no sort of different. I don't differentiate between myself and my art. It's one, and I couldn't not do it.
Do you see yourself kind of as a link in the modern world to these old traditions and thoughts? Like, would you say that's your calling, is to bring these old ideas into the modern age and try and introduce them to modern minds?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that, because what I do is not about preaching any truth or trying to convert people to sort of think in a certain way and not. It's more truly and honestly, it's just that for me, when I look at so many of these things that are born out of nature that we still surround us with, thus making it still relevant, that they are relevant, and that's it's not about dreaming away to the past and thinking that everything was so much better in earlier times. Some things were perhaps, but many things weren't, and many things from the past aren't really that relevant anymore. So my focus is always there, and I guess I don't know. I just wanted to hear this kind of music. I felt like there were so many treasures just lying in the corner, gathering dust, forgotten. So I don't know. I just wanted to give, or still want to give voice to these things, and to sort of give voice to these old ideas, to these old instruments and tools and techniques. And I guess in the beginning I I didn't I thought it would be way too strange I didn't think people were gonna like it at all, nor did I really care. So I was very surprised by because when I started showing the songs to people, they reacted very strongly to it, and very immediate. And that was the case also when I started sort of bringing it to people within the music industry as well, that people reacted strongly to it. And that was very much a surprise, because I did it for for myself and didn't really pay much attention to the sort of next stage of the musical, of the music, rather just focused on the creative process itself. And that makes everything else a bonus. Of course, I'm very thankful for the fact that apparently there are many other people who have been longing for something like this to appear. And I guess in modern Western society, when we're so disconnected to each other and to nature itself, that music like this can work as a link and as an eye opener or as a remembering, and so on.
The authenticity that you're talking about here is very obvious in your music, and I was lucky enough to see you in Halden at Tons of Rock this year, actually, and that was an amazing show. What do you think is the reason why you're becoming so popular? Why do you think it's resonating with people so much?
Well, it's kind of like I said. I think that the fact that it's relevant still, that I'm not giving voice to empty symbols that don't carry any meaning anymore. It's the opposite. I give voice to the stuff from the past that still carry meaning and still resonate within us, both in terms of the thematics, but also in terms of the musical techniques that are timeless, that are almost, I would say, universal when you go far enough back in time. Even though I put my music inside this Norse rapping in a way, a lot of the things are universal things and timeless, and they transcend a lot of these genre borders of genre or language or whatever. And I don't know, also the fact that in our concerts we do try to create this solemn, sacred space where you the listener can lose yourself into it or connect to it or whatever, in whether or not it's a spiritual thing or a philosophical thing or just a aesthetical thing. It doesn't really matter. But I think for people who don't experience ritual, whether or not it's in the mosque or in a church or whatever, that our shows can fill a gap there. I think a gap that and a longing that I think many people feel a longing to connect something bigger than yourself. And if you boil Wardruna down to essence, it is really about, I would say, three things. It's about nature and our relation to it. It's about our relation to each other and to something that is bigger than yourself. It doesn't need to be a religious thing. And that makes it, I guess, easy to connect to. And also, it's these things are born out of something universal and timeless, and you see it in the musical in the musical techniques, in the tonality, in the instrumentation, that there are a lot of things there that carry qualities that I think it's easy for people to connect to, whether or not you have a. I don't think it matters whether or not you are where you're from or what cultural background you have or social background or age or gender. It doesn't really matter. These things transcend all of that easily. That's why we see people reacting the same exact way in the same places during the set, whether or not we perform it in Norway or it's on the other side of the planet. So it's very fascinating, very powerful to be part of it, part of that dialogue.
Why do you think there's that longing you mentioned that people appear to have? Why do you think there's that desire for that connection for something deeper?
I think that's a natural thing for us, but we are so numbed by technology, TV, iPads, phones, society itself. On the other hand, you have to remember that, or at least in my opinion, and out of my perspective, it's not about romanticizing about the past, because their relation to nature was completely different. They saw nature as something they had to tame. They saw it as almost as the enemy. So, and in our world, it's the other way around. We tamed it, and that has sort of removed us from ourselves in a way. So we need that nature romanticizing. We need the beauty of nature, and so it's very much different from the old culture. But that's the interesting thing, how these things so easily you can mirror them. So I guess that in a nutshell, that is why I think people have this longing that we are so disconnected from and numbed from ourselves and the world we we sort of put ourselves outside the network of beings and of nature, on top of everything.
So something like we put the world into too much order, and now there's no longer that chaos outside of it, which is nature, and therefore we don't have that connection anymore. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, in a way, but I have to say we created a new chaos, I would say. We didn't remove ourselves from chaos. We in our taming nature, we created a new chaos. That But yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Do you see, I guess, part of Wardruna's role is maybe showing the modern world that balance is possible between, the good stuff that the modern age has brought? I mean, like technology and that kind of stuff that makes us live longer, without sort of that negative stuff that makes us numb or detaches us from the world?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's very. I don't think it's very fruitful to think that. I don't think it's constructive to have a romantic idea about the past, because if you want to make something grow, you have to focus forward. You have to, but not forgetting the past. Like I always say, a tree without roots will fall, and so I definitely think that the constructive way is to look ahead, focus on the things that you are that you want to grow, water the plants that you want to grow, basically. So I think it's really important to focus ahead, and with Wardruna, that is sort of, for me, it's always been a point in itself to not have it as a goal to necessarily make everything authentic. I think that would make it ultimately less interesting, because it's more about taking something old and making something new with it, something that resonates with the contemporary listener and the contemporary human being. It's here and now we live, So that's something that's basically really, really, really at the core of what we're doing. I don't think your roots are important just because they are your roots. That would be a heavy burden to bear. You take what you need and move on. That's more constructive.
So how do you figure that out? How do you figure out what is relevant that you can bring into the present and still have that relevance? How do you determine that?
Well, some things are very easy to determine, for anybody who has, for instance, done ritual work, knows that for a ritual object to have a powerful symbolic quality, then it needs to be part of a language or that all the participants, they understand, they acknowledge it. It has a certain power and it has a certain relevance. If it doesn't, it becomes a empty symbol with no power. So if you in terms of symbolic language, that's sort of a premise for it to carry relevance and to have a power. Whether or not it's aesthetic or whatever, it has to speak to the people. They have to understand what it means. And for instance, you see these, in terms of old type sorcery, you have these iron staffs found in female graves from Iron Age, which, some say they are like cultic distaffs, and of course, one of the immense power that object would have had in the context where it was presented, with just for the fact that it was made of metal and the fact that it had melted metals on it as well. In many cases, it carries such a power in itself because back then it was precious, and it told you something about being able to shape nature. So it had a protective power to itself also, but also a value in itself. You couldn't go down to the hardware store and buy some iron. So that's a pretty easy example of something that just wouldn't even come close to have the same impact as a symbolic religious object today. Whether or not you just reenact it, you can't even come close. So some things are obvious, of course, in terms of having relevance anymore, and some things are more obscured and difficult to determine, I guess. But when you work with these things, and when I think in whatever you do in life, you have to reflect. You have to be self-aware on these things and how they impact on you, and what the feelings they create or don't create, etc. So it's not an easy answer to that.
You've mentioned the importance of ritual a few times. What do you think the importance of ritual is?
That's a big question, and it totally depends on for who and for what. In religious context, in public cult, it has, of course, ritual is creating a space. It's giving a face to, it's sort of playing out some. It can be, it can be inner conflict. It can be your desires. It can be many things, depending on, it's such a broad question, depending on what kind of ritual but I think feeling connectiveness is to something bigger than yourself, whether or not it's each other, or it's a spiritual thing, or just being connected to nature and being part of it. It can be many different things, but I do think that ritual has that function, very much so, no matter what religion. And then you have all sorts of, a ritual can be many things. It can be just knocking on wood whenever you're supposed to do that, or throwing salt over your shoulder, or it can be many things. It can be a football player touching the grass before entering the field. It can be so many things, and it has a psychological effect on you, giving you some sort of power that you basically give yourself by doing a ritual. In a magical performer's sense, it can have the function of protecting yourself. It can give you doing a ritual before doing sorcery or whatever. It can have the function of putting you in the right mindset, for instance. So it can be so many things. We could go on and on, I guess.
Maybe could you tell us a little bit about some of the esoteric things that you've been mentioning? I think the runes would count as one, but anything else you'd like to mention?
Well, that can be many things. I guess something esoteric or sorcery or magic. It can be many things, and I think a lot of people have a very disillusioned image of what it is. Have this. And what it was, it's it can be. There is nobody waving a wand, saying Shazam, and then all of a sudden things starts to appear. There are many things, and of course, many of them are connected to the oral tradition. That this culture was an oral society, which is one of the reasons why. Of course, runes also have a very strong power, and was considered to be sort of one of the highest levels of knowledge or quality you could have back then. So the impact of words and of constructing poetry in a specific way, or being able to manifest words onto objects, like in runes, in different ways. Of course, we see that there is a very strong connection between, and sort of a give and take relationship between the verbal and the graphic or written sorcery. Of course, one thing is the runes themselves. The runes are the runes are so many different things. Even the word rune can mean a number of various things. The core of the word ru is connected to creating sound. The word can mean knowledge, it can mean a secret, it can mean to whisper, it can mean a magical song, and of course it's a written letter with a phonetic sound. So whenever you see this word, it can mean any number of these things. It can mean several of them at once. So it's quite complicated. So the runes they have. We also know, because of some a collection of poetry written down about these runes, these proverbs, both hinting towards or giving us names to each of the runes, but also they hint towards symbolic quality that each rune represents. Giving voice to these ideas are important in my work, and that's sort of the creative concept, to get as close as possible to them. We also have a system connected to the runes that also give them a numeric value. We know, because in the mid 1800s there was recorded by an Icelandic runologist, wrote about the concept of the three ettir, that the runes are divided into three families, basically. And the reason for this is that to be able to write cipher runes or secret runes, or to hide stuff, but that also gives them a numeric value. And a lot of these other poems, they can suggest time of year, they can suggest state of mind, and so on, specific placements, and all of these things are things that I implement in my music. So if it is the rune for the birch tree, I go into the woods and I play on birch trees. And for the runologic nerds, I can add that I only played on the branches leaning towards the east, and so on. There are so many layers of this, and a different tradition that is also have a graphic structure, but also a poetic structure, is something we call galdr. So, and that's basically, it can be a graphical symbol, personal graphical symbol that we see in something that survived up until quite late medieval time, basically more or less up until our time in certain places in Iceland especially. But this is also connected to a specific poetic structure, a verse metric called galdralag. So that is also an aspect that I try to work with in my music, to attempt to write, especially specific parts in this verse metric, and that's something. I don't think I would have done it if it wasn't because I see and experience it having an impact. It is when it is perfectly constructed for its purpose, I would say. And also it has this, it's the only verse metric where you see repetition. Repetition, which is something that you also see being used in rune magic, where a single very seldom has an impact as anything else than just being a written symbol. But when it's repeated or when it's in a word, then you're after something more esoteric. And of course, I'm on a personal level. I've studied and I've worked a lot with the more ecstatic forms of magic, ecstatic form of singing and so on that we have tradition for here in the north, which both with the Seiður and other things. So there are many things on many different layers and levels, I would say, that you can find in my music. Some songs you can, for people who know a little bit about it, can actually learn quite a lot from the lyrical contents, I mean. And I have to say, humbly speaking, that when all of my approach to all of these things, it's something it's something I acknowledge as something very complicated. That even though I've been working with many of these things for the better part of my life, I still feel like a novice, and there are so many things from the history, and especially about runes and many of the other esoteric parts that we simply don't know. We can make educated guesses, but I strive to sort of always start out on solid ground. That's why my approach to these things both have the academic approach as a base, and then I go before venturing into the more intuitive part of it. I think I don't climb into trees that don't have roots, if you know what I mean.
That is really all fascinating. Thank you so much for giving us that insight into your work with all this, with the runes, with your experience. Really is quite amazing to hear about all the layers that you kind of go through to really honor these symbols and connect with them. I think we would like to hear a little bit about what you're working on. I understand you've got a new album coming out fairly shortly here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Soon coming out with a new album that is called Skald. That is basically honoring the old oral tradition, poetic tradition, and my modern take on it in a way. So it's basically an album presenting more the material I do when I perform alone. So it's my voice and a single instrument at the time. Both my own creations, but also very old skaldic poetry and also Eddic poetry with famous excerpts of famous poems like Voluspá and so on. So it's that's something that is set for release in November 23rd, and also I'm fully into the next full-on Wardruna album as well. So lots of stuff happening at the moment. Never a dull moment.
That's awesome. We silently cheered as you said a new Wardruna album. We're very excited for that.
Yeah, so am I. I'm very, when you've I've been so locked up into this runic trilogy that took me 15 years to write. So I've had a lot of ideas put on hold and things that I want to do with Wardruna still. So it feels really good to. I feel very inspired and still hungry, chasing songs.
That's awesome. And I just want to say something that I think I'm speaking for both of us when we say that when we listen to Wardruna, we absolutely feel the power that you seem to be trying to consciously put into it. You know, we have felt the at least glimpses of sort of ecstatic moments and things like that. We're not trained in any esoteric way, but I know Luke and I have both discussed like listening to it and maybe feeling the beginnings of like an altered state or something like that. That it's very powerful music.
Yeah, and you know that, and that's the power of and that's magic for you. And that's the power of voice. It can be the power of certain tonalities. It can be the power of frequencies in a drum or the pulse of a drum. That there are all of these elements that you see are being used in a very deliberate and a very specific way throughout the ages on all the corners of this planet. It has different shapes and accents, if you know, but knowing how to use these things and using them, I don't like the word deliberately, but consciously, has, of course, it will have an impact on the listener. And you know, I could chop off a table leg and get the same sound of as the birch tree in the song Bjarkan, but I'm 100% sure that by not cheating, by actually adding this value to the recordings and the songs, adding my heart 100% and so on, that whether or not it's perceived consciously or subconsciously, I'm 100% sure that it is being perceived in some way by the listener. And that's, to be able to reach the heart, it needs to come from the heart, you know. It sounds simple, but it is actually quite difficult, and it demands a lot of, it demands a lot. But on the other hand, anything of any value here in life comes at a cost.
Absolutely. I don't think I could have said it better myself.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. It's been fascinating to hear everything you've talked about here, and honestly, you're welcome back on anytime. We really have enjoyed speaking with you here.
It's been a great honor.
I'm glad to hear, and thank you for having me.
All right. So just to wrap up, I guess we'll get into our normal housekeeping stuff at the end of the show. You can reach us on social media, and we absolutely encourage you to reach us because we love talking to you guys. So on Twitter, it's at Northern Myths. We're both on Twitter at NorthMythDan, at NorthMythLuke. On Facebook, Northern Myths Podcast. Instagram, at Northern Myths Podcast as well. And, we also have our store where you can get some Northern Myths Podcast merch. We've got mugs and t-shirts so far, but who knows what will come next. I know I've got my t-shirt coming in the mail, so I'm pretty excited about that. There's a new Wardruna album coming out November 23rd, entitled Skald, and it's basically Einar performing acoustic versions of his songs, so that should be quite awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. Is there anything else, Luke?
No, I guess, again, just to thank Einar for coming on the show. This was a fantastic talk, loads of super interesting things. I know I wasn't exactly expecting us to go in so many different directions, and it was really awesome to get to talk to Einar. So thank you again to Einar for joining us. That was fantastic. And we'll be posting links to Einar's website, Wardruna's website, and and to a little bit of a preview for this album, and all the information about the album, where you can purchase it and all that. And as well, we'll be adding some Wardruna material to our recommended music page on our website. We've also got a recommended books page on our website, and if you go to either one and you decide to purchase something off there, a little bit goes towards the podcast. It's through the Amazon affiliate program, and so that's just another great way you can support the show if you so choose. And with that, I think that's just about everything. Is there anything I'm forgetting, Dan?
Well, there is one thing, and it's the most important thing, and that's for everyone to go out and find the myth that you're living. This is the Northern Myths podcast. Thanks for listening.